Thank you, Joey. Okay, so as Joey said, my name is Maggie Murphy, and I am the Art and Design Librarian at UNC Greensboro University Libraries in Greensboro, North Carolina. The idea of unframing visual literacy, or taking a conscious pedagogical approach to visuals that acknowledges that visuals are a pervasive part of our everyday life, as well as embedded in every academic discipline, comes from a book I edited with my colleagues Stephanie Bean, Katie Greer, Sarah Schumacher, and Dana Thompson. And I'd like to thank them and the other members of the ACRL Visual Literacy Task Force for literally years of collaboration and support. I've worked in academic libraries for close to 15 years and at UNC Greensboro since 2017. As the art and design librarian, I work with students and faculty in art, architecture, media studies, and apparel design to support their research, scholarship, and creative output, while also producing my own research and scholarship as an associate professor. This past fall, I also decided to pursue an MFA in studio art, giving me a more embodied understanding of how studio artists seek out and use information of all kinds in their work, which is actually one of my major research interests alongside visual literacy. My talk today is going to be pretty straightforward. First, we're going to think about a current definition of visual literacy in the context of the historical development of the concept, both beyond and within librarianship. Then we're going to look at the ACRL Framework for Visual Literacy, which is a guidance document for visual literacy teaching and learning used by academic information professionals across disciplines. And then we'll follow that by looking at some practical examples of visual literacy using the 4 major themes of that framework. And finally, close with your questions and discussion. Throughout this talk, I'm going to refer to images, visual media, visual materials, or more broadly, just visuals as something we are constantly surrounded by. So let's take a minute for you to privately think about what visuals you encounter in your day-to-day life as you define them. You can jot them down or just keep them in mind as we start to move through the presentation, particularly as we get to the practical examples. So you can reflect on how you might position yourself as a visual literacy lifelong learner. So I'm just going to sit here for like maybe 30, 40 seconds if you want to just brainstorm about that for a second. Okay, so to get started, what is visual literacy? This is my personal definition, and it's pretty dense, so I think it would be helpful to go line by line and break it down more. So visual literacy is an interconnected set of practices, habits, and values, which means that visual literacy includes things that you do intentionally, things that you do that are more ingrained, and things that you care about and place value upon. These practices, habits, and values are overlapping and linked to each other. I really liked the image I chose to illustrate this idea, which I found on Wikimedia Commons. Its creator described the digital drawing as Mikado sticks of various colors to represent how we are all connected. The interconnected set of practices, habits, and values constituting visual literacy are for participating in visual culture, which means taking an active part in the ongoing exchange of visuals made by humans, from street signs to fine art. The image I found to illustrate this idea is a collage that was created for a call to action art commission contest promoted by the organization Art and Feminism. Therefore, the creator of this image is a great example of an active participant in visual culture. These practices, habits, and values that make up visual literacy can be developed through critical, ethical, reflective, and creative engagement with visual media. This just means that you can shape these skills and perspectives by thinking carefully, making thoughtful choices, considering your own experiences and assumptions, and exploring new and imaginative ways to interact with visuals. The image I chose to go along with this concept is a photograph of museum visitors looking at a tile mural and its accompanying historical and cultural contextual information in Lisbon, Portugal. So the people in this photo are perhaps reflecting on not just how the tiles were created, but also the architecture depicted, how it was built, the cultural and artistic significance they hold, maybe thinking about historical Portugal as a colonial power and place of exchange, maybe thinking about who or what might be missing from the mural, and perhaps taking some creative inspiration for their own day-to-day lives. But what exactly do I mean by visuals or visual media? So the image here shows some street art in the form of a sticker and some wheat pasted flyers on the side of an electrical box in La Paz, Bolivia. Is this visual media? The word media may make you think of things that are traditionally or formally published, but in this case, I mean media like the plural of medium, so material, form, mode. Therefore, visual media includes anything produced as part of human, visual, and sometimes material or physical culture. So here are some examples. It's a list that's not meant at all to be exhaustive. And at the center, where in bold it says multimedia, I mean moving or multimodal media that includes visual elements. So TikToks, zines, graphic novels, postcards, music videos, magazine covers, scrapbooks, websites, consumer packaging, protest signs, calendars, stamps, and on and on and on. If you read about the history of the term visual literacy, you'll almost always find it attributed to John Debs, who was an employee of Eastman Kodak in the 1960s. Debs tentatively defined visual literacy in 1969 as a group of vision competencies a human being can develop by seeing and at the same time having and integrating other sensory experiences. Debs and fellow scholars and practitioners, many from the University of Rochester in New York, co-founded the International Visual Literacy Association, which is still around, and held the first formal conference on visual literacy that same year, 1969. However, Ernesto Pena and Teresa Dobson have traced even earlier uses of the term visual literacy to art educators in the late 1930s and 1940s. So Debs is kind of credited for coining the term, but it's been around longer than that. Until the 1990s, interest in visual literacy studies was pretty focused in a few key fields like art education, cognitive psychology, media studies, visual communication, and educational technology. But the so-called visual turn of the 1990s, also termed the pictorial turn by W.J.T. Mitchell, represented a renewed interest in pictures and images in humanities and social science fields. And this really opened up visual literacy as an interdisciplinary concern in academia. For librarians, a major milestone in the history of visual literacy was the publication of the ACRL Visual Literacy Competency Standards in 2011 as a companion to the Information Literacy Competency Standards. So the Visual Literacy Competency Standards were a companion to the Information Literacy Competency Standards. This guidance document, the Visual Literacy Standards, offered what is now probably the most widely used definition of visual literacy, which is visual literacy is a set of abilities that enables an individual to effectively find, interpret, evaluate, use, and create images and visual media. The document also included a set of 8 standards or end goals for becoming visually literate, with attending performance indicators and learning outcomes for assessing visual literacy learning by students at the college level. These standards were hugely influential on visual literacy pedagogy, both within and outside librarianship. The publication of the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy in 2016 also had a big influence on visual literacy teaching and learning for libraries. This is because this framework, which was the hallmark document for the Association of College and Research Libraries, moved away from the fixed prescriptive approach to information literacy taken in the 2000 information literacy standards and instead embraced a more flexible conceptual model of non-linear, critical, lifelong learning and metacognition around information in all formats, including the visual. After this new information literacy framework was published, ACRL wanted to update all of its other standards as well, and so it convened a new visual literacy task force. The task force, of which I was a member, wanted its new document to represent the most current thinking among visual literacy practitioners. So we conducted an empirical research study over 3 years, interviewing more than 60 experts in different fields to identify emergent trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping visual literacy teaching, learning, and practice. This research informed the framework for visual literacy in higher education, which was adopted to supersede the visual literacy standards in June 2022. And the map here just shows the geographic dispersion of the 100+ folks we initially invited to participate in our research. So the framework for visual literacy is organized into 4 major themes for visual literacy learning that emerged from our research. These themes are: learners actively participate in a changing visual information landscape. Learners perceive visuals as communicating information. Learners practice visual discernment and criticality. And finally, learners pursue social justice through visual practice. The document also contains a set of knowledge practices and dispositions for each theme. So a knowledge practice is an action or skill that helps a learner better understand and work with visuals. And a disposition is a mindset or attitude that a learner can bring to their interactions with visual media. This graphic shows some of the major topics covered by each theme, and it also shows that the 4th theme, learners pursue social justice through visual practice, actually encompasses topics that first appear in one of the 3 other themes. This is because we wanted to emphasize that the pursuit of social justice is integral to visual literacy learning and can't just be siloed off as something discrete or separate from the other themes. So you've stuck through a lot of overview with me, and we finally made it to the more fun part. So we're going to go theme by theme to consider what visual literacy learning looks like in practice. So what does it mean to participate in a changing visual information landscape? This theme emphasizes the dynamic and evolving nature of visual information in the digital age. The knowledge practices and dispositions focus on how learners can actively situate themselves within the broader ecosystem of visual information, highlighting technological and systemic influences that shape access, understanding, and ethical considerations in a digitally saturated world. In order to participate in this changing landscape, learners have to critically engage with how visuals are created, shared, classified, and consumed within technologies and systems that often reflect and reinforce social inequity. So the first knowledge practice I'd like to consider is visual literacy learners anticipate the ways in which algorithms, social media, and participatory technologies obscure or promote visuals and visual media creators, which may reflect commercial interests and reinforce existing social dynamics. Sorry. And what does this look like in practice? As a teaching librarian who works with art students, one of the things that I work hard to do is help them reflect on the role of suggestion algorithms, which are also called recommendation algorithms, in determining what they see on digital platforms. So for example, on the right, you can see some recent screenshots from my Instagram Discover feed. If you're not familiar with Instagram, this is a cascading endless feed of images and videos, not from accounts that I actually follow, but of content that has been curated and suggested for me by Instagram's algorithm. So this algorithm pushes content to this feed not randomly, but based on what I interact with on the platform, the types of visual content I regularly look at, like, save, and share. So this type of algorithm, a suggestion or recommendation algorithm, curates headlines and articles on news feeds, curates streaming media suggestions and playlists on platforms like Netflix and Spotify. It recommends products on commercial sites like Amazon and Etsy, and crucially suggests content on social media and hobby sites like TikTok, Reddit, Pinterest, and Instagram. So depending on an algorithmically determined feed like this, as the main way you encounter new visual inspiration as a developing art student can really mean that you're enclosing yourself in a feedback loop. So you're just seeing more of what you are already interacting with. For artists, social media platforms can absolutely allow us to find and follow creators who do not have representation in traditional art world institutions, like representation by galleries, exhibitions and museums, coverage by art media, and so on. However, if the images you're seeing mainly reflect more of the content that you already like and look at as a developing artist, you might be less likely to make serendipitous discoveries or be pushed outside of your comfort zone in terms of medium, form, color, concept, and so on. So further, if you're not already consuming content by diverse creators or content reflective of underrepresented experiences, you may not be exposed to them in this kind of feed. And so awareness of this dynamic for visual literacy learners who are not artists is, of course, just as crucial, given that information behavior research suggests that the majority of users of visual platforms like Instagram and Pinterest specifically use them for finding inspiration, whatever their interests or hobbies may be. So to go back to this knowledge practice of anticipating the ways in which algorithms can obscure or promote visuals and creators, as lifelong visual literacy learners, one thing we can do beyond being aware of the role of algorithms in curating our visual influences is to take active steps to expose ourselves to visual content outside of algorithmic environments as a supplement to the stuff that algorithms are pushing at us. This can be as easy as browsing images and visual printed matter in books in a library or in a used bookstore or zine collection, looking around a museum, a gallery, a student exhibition in person or online, flipping through family photo albums, scrapbooks, sketchbooks, examining signs and street art as we walk around our towns and cities, or exploring visual ephemera at your local creative reuse center. In New York City, for example, if you're local to the Frick, you have a huge one in Long Island City called Materials for the Arts. I'm not affiliated with them, but I would love to visit because I love creative reuse centers. You could also try to confound the algorithm a bit or spice things up by searching for random keywords and spending some time looking at content that surprises or even confuses you. Sometimes with students, I like to use a website consisting of a random noun or adjective generator. There are a bunch of them that you can find through a simple Google search. And this is a way to come up with keywords to search for in social media platforms or even in our library book catalog. To look at a different example within this theme, a disposition is that visual literacy learners understand that ethical and legal frameworks for accessing and sharing visuals are not universal, but vary by country and global region. And very quickly, because I am even mentioning legal frameworks here, I just need to say I am not a lawyer, obviously, I'm a librarian, and at no point in this presentation should anything I say be construed as legal advice. Okay, so an easy illustration of this disposition in practice is to think about Creative Commons licenses, which you may have encountered or even used yourself. Creative Commons is both a legal and ethical framework through which creators can proactively indicate the conditions under which others are allowed to use their intellectual property, including images they have created. For example, if you upload an image to Flickr, the website Flickr, you have the opportunity to assign a Creative Commons license to it. However, while use of these licenses is fairly widespread, they are, as an ethical framework, it is in no way universal, right? It's not compulsory, it is optional, and it is not used everywhere. There are even different non-governmental optional licensing mechanisms that creators across the globe can use for the same purpose. Or most frequently, creators will publish images online without appending a license to it at all. Therefore, a visual literacy learner can think about how, despite the presence or absence of a Creative Commons license published with an image they encounter online, there are other legal and ethical frameworks that might be at play as well. For another example, as a hobby, I edit Wikipedia articles, and there may be a perception that anything can be added to Wikipedia, the free online encyclopedia. But Wikipedia actually has some pretty stringent content policies, especially around images. And if a user wants to upload an image to Wikipedia Commons to share on Wikimedia Commons to share on Wikipedia, they have to indicate what kind of license the image has been shared under that gives them permission to do so, or indicate which country's public domain laws the user thinks apply to that image. So this screenshot just shows a partial list of Wikipedia tags that may apply to certain types of images from Argentina, Albania, Australia, Bangladesh, Brazil, Canada, China. And even this partial list quickly demonstrates that the circumstances by which an image may be considered part of the public domain or whatever similar framework exists varies greatly from country to country, depending on that country's laws. So therefore, visual literacy learners who want to participate in a changing information environment should have a baseline understanding about there being a lack of universal norms and laws surrounding visuals, and even strive to develop critical and reflective habits around ethical and legal frameworks for visuals that they both encounter and share online. Moving on to our next theme, what does it mean to perceive visuals as communicating information? This theme explores how visuals convey messages through cultural, disciplinary, and community contexts, often functioning as multimodal forms of communication. The knowledge practices and dispositions in this theme emphasize skills and mindsets for exploring the iterative process of visual creation and creating visuals that align with their intended message while ensuring inclusive and ethical practices. To perceive visuals as communicating information, learners can engage with the expressive and interpretive aspects of visuals, focusing on message, design, and impact on audience. So one of my favorite dispositions within this theme is visual literacy learners recognize that a visual's communicative intent and purpose can be changed through modification, repurposing, remix, or reformatting. In other words, a visual's meaning is not fixed. It evolves based on how it is modified or used in different contexts, right? So for example, simple changes we might make to a photo we've snapped on our phone, such as adjusting colors or adding filters or stickers, can alter its emotional impact. Or something like a news agency cropping a photo of a peaceful demonstration to focus on a passing verbal confrontation between a protester and law enforcement officer can shift the message of that photo from unity to conflict. Working with students, an easy way to think about this disposition is through collage making, which requires us to repurpose and remix images to create new artistic meaning. And one of my favorite examples of seeing this disposition in action, not with collage, but with something else, was during the COVID lockdowns, where there was a trend on social media prompting people in their homes to recreate works of art from museum collections in a casual, hands-on way. So these recreations brought traditional and sometimes iconic works of art, of fine art, into the intimate and relatable context of people's everyday lives during a time of global uncertainty. The use of everyday objects like toilet paper, children's toys, bed linens, like sheets were used sculpturally everywhere, communicated about shared experiences of scarcity, isolation, and creativity during lockdowns, something that the originals could not directly address or communicate about as products of entirely different time periods and creative purposes. The playfulness of the images also contrasts with the often formal and even reverent way that fine artwork is presented in the context of brick and mortar museums and on museum websites, which added a levity that might not exist in the original work and creating a sense of connection and community through shared amusement, shared laughter. A different knowledge practice from this theme that I think about and personally work on all the time is visual literacy learners define and articulate the need for visuals within a project, assessing the audience for the project and the manner in which it will be shared, as well as how the use of visuals support the purpose of the project. For example, when Joey invited me to do this talk, I knew that for a presentation about visual literacy, I would need a lot of images to illustrate the concepts I want to discuss, which are sometimes abstract. I'd also need to think about finding and selecting images that would be appropriate for a talk hosted by the Frick Art Research Library and later hosted on YouTube, and for an audience of folks who have different levels of interest in and knowledge about the subject. So what I did in terms of thinking about gathering images for use in this presentation is something that I develop a lot of instruction on and create resources about for the students at my institution. For example, I made an online guide for students at UNCG for finding and selecting images that support the needs of various projects and usages. And there's a screenshot of the sort of homepage for that here. And on the Finding Images tab of that questionnaire, I even created, or tab of that guide, I even created a brief questionnaire to help students think through defining and articulating their image needs so they can better put this knowledge practice into action. And I'm not going to read all of this, but you can see that there are 4 main questions making up this questionnaire. And this is a freely available resource if you are interested in looking at it at any point. My email will be at the end of the presentation. So to move on to the next theme, what does it mean to practice visual discernment and criticality? So this theme highlights the importance of critically analyzing visuals, recognizing their inherent biases, manipulative potential, and sociocultural values. So learners are encouraged to reflect on their own assumptions and positionality while evaluating the impact of visual media. So to practice visual discernment and criticality, learners can develop habits for regular and reflective interrogation of visuals, valuing both thoughtful inquiry and mindfulness and visual engagement. So one of the key knowledge practices in this theme, in my opinion, is visual literacy learners examine visuals slowly and deeply in order to develop and refine critical observation skills. As you may be aware, if you are interested in art or spend time in museum collections, there are a whole host of approaches known as slow looking, close looking, or deep looking that focus on deliberate and mindful observation of visuals to foster critical thinking and creativity, often embraced by art educators and museum professionals, but with growing use in library settings. So slow looking involves taking the time to carefully observe a visual object or scene, focusing on its details and complexities. It encourages viewers to move beyond initial impressions, allowing for a deeper understanding and appreciation of the subject. The actual term slow looking is often associated with Shari Tishman, who's a senior research associate at Harvard's Project Zero. And she popularized the concept in her 2017 book, Slow Looking, The Art and Practice of Learning Through Observation. So an easy example of a slow looking activity that you may have seen is the New York Times What's Going On with This Picture, which is a weekly feature in the Times in which they post a photograph stripped of its caption, so no caption is posted with it, and they invite students to discuss what they see in a moderated online forum. Another slow looking activity is the application of the digital image guide method, which was developed by my friend and visual literacy task force member, Dana Thompson. Dana and another task force member, Stephanie Beam, have an entire book of lesson plans around slow looking and critical discernment for use by librarians. That was either just published or will be published in like the next few weeks. Showing more of its application within libraries. Visual Thinking Strategies, or VTS, is a structured, close-looking and discussion method developed by Abigail Housen and Philip Yanowine. I've taken VTS programming and I still can't remember how his last name is pronounced, so sorry to Philip, about 30 years ago, they developed it. That is in widespread spread use by museum educators. However, research has shown that this method in particular can explicitly help students and professionals in a range of applied fields increase and refine their critical observation skills. So through guided discussions based on open-ended questions like, what is going on in this picture? And what do you see that makes you say that? VTS helps participants deepen their engagement with visual materials and refine their ability to notice details and think critically about what they see. So for example, in medical education, this method has been used to train doctors and medical students to notice subtle visual cues in diagnostic images and patient assessments, even though during the VTS sessions, they're looking at works of art. In forensics, for example, it can also sharpen professionals' abilities to evaluate visual evidence methodically, put the emphasis on the wrong syllable there. So I think this demonstrates the importance of seeing visual literacy also as an interdisciplinary concern, particularly in higher education, and not just a concern for art or art students. Another crucial disposition in this theme is visual literacy learners discern the role of visuals in the spread and acceptance of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. And I put this meme on this slide as an illustration because I think it demonstrates that false or misleading information online is spread not just through sophisticated or coordinated attempts to influence politics or change public perception about current events, but because I think there are frankly just a lot of people on the internet who intentionally create and share like provocative, absurd, low effort content designed to confuse people and elicit strong reactions from others, including misinformation. So visual literacy learners should both be aware of the role of visuals in spreading and persuading people to believe inaccurate, deceptive, problematic, or harmful content, but they should also be able to discern the different methods by which this is achieved. So in these examples, the first image is a meme that takes a photograph of Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts and pairs it with misleading text that suggests or implies that the sea level has not risen at all over the centuries since the Plymouth Rock was like inscribed there. And so by presenting this isolated visual, a photograph of Plymouth Rock without any supporting evidence or scientific context, it's explicitly misrepresenting the complex realities of climate change and sea level rise, and totally ignoring factors like erosion, engineered protections around the site, or even just like daily tide cycles. The second image is a little more complicated. So it's a small screenshot, so I'll explain to you what's going on. So it's a screenshot of a social media post, and the text above the map claims that the map shows that dams around Valencia, Spain, have been removed from local rivers, and argues that the mainstream news media is not reporting on the issue of dam removal. When in fact, this map shows where existing river barriers are and continue to be located. So it's using a trick of context by removing the map from its original location, removing the label or key on the map to create intentional disinformation. So Valencia in Spain was a site of catastrophic flooding this past October. And this above image and text was shared on X, formerly Twitter, where it received more than 196,000 views. So the third image is one that you may have seen, purporting to show Pope Francis wearing like a fashionable puffer jacket, like street fashion. And it was entirely fabricated by the Midjourney generative AI tool. Its realistic appearance led many online to believe that it was an authentic photograph, like a news photograph. underscoring the potential for AI-generated visuals to spread misleading images, or for people to spread misleading images of AI-generated visuals, particularly when they get shared without clarification of their origin. So sometimes folks even post AI-generated visuals being like, AI generated this, but because they look so convincing, they get shared without that context, and people think that they're real. Finally, the fourth image is another instance of trick of context. So it is a screenshot shared on social media from a TikTok video that shows someone like standing in a supermarket, holding a pack of bacon. And the bacon bears a label that says 3D printed bacon. And so the video on TikTok was published by an account that like describes itself as making political art. So they like printed out this label, put it on bacon. They were in a supermarket as some kind of like artistic statement. But the screenshot removes that original artistic framing and is repurposed to mislead viewers of this image about the existence of 3D printed bacon in commercial food production, which at this point does not exist. And so AI-generated deepfakes and intentionally manipulated images have even greater potential to deceive and provoke people. And so we've arrived at the last theme. And so what does it mean to pursue social justice through visual practice? This theme emphasizes the role of visuals in promoting equity, inclusion, and justice by addressing systemic barriers and decentering dominant narratives. Learners create, share, and analyze visuals with a commitment to respecting cultural property, implementing accessibility strategies, and amplifying diverse voices to pursue social justice through visual practice. Learners must ultimately value ethical and equitable engagement with visuals above their aesthetic goals, so things that look nice, or above mere convenience because it is easy to use them. So don't laugh, but the term artificial intelligence does not actually appear anywhere in the framework for visual literacy. In fact, the document that I was one of the authors of, we worked on it, we shared it for feedback, and it was adopted by the Association of College and Research Libraries about 2 weeks before Midjourney, the AI-driven image generation platform, became publicly accessible. So the summer of 2022, that was in July 2022, when Midjourney's public beta became available, that was when all of these digital platforms for image generation kind of became publicly accessible. However, I think you can still make clear connections between generative AI and a disposition such as this one. Visual literacy learners prioritize ethical considerations for cultural and intellectual property when creating, sharing, or using visuals. So you may be aware there are many ethical concerns about using generative AI to create visuals, concerns related to cultural and intellectual property. For example, generative AI tools rely on vast data sets that are almost entirely comprised of copyrighted images built without permission from those copyrighted holders. This means that AI-generated images are able to mimic or directly use the work of artists who are not consulted or compensated by AI companies. And the platforms have been shown to be able to create illustrations in the style of living artists whose works were scraped from the internet without their permission. This has led to a number of lawsuits, and I'm not commenting on the lawsuits, such as the one filed by the artists whose names appear on the thumbnail on the slide. And this raises a lot of ethical questions about ownership, attribution, and fair use. There are also a lot of ethical and social justice related concerns around generative AI that have nothing to do with intellectual and cultural property. For example, generative AI relies on energy and water intensive computing processes contributing to the climate crisis. AI data sets are often built with the help of underpaid workers, many of whom perform repetitive and poorly compensated tasks like labeling images or moderating content. AI platforms can reduce opportunities for human artists and human models. For example, a denim company announced last year that they would be using AI-generated models of color to increase diversity in their advertisements instead of like hiring them. But the specifics of how different generative AI platforms work and what content they produce under what limitations, these are also evolving, as are the conversations around them. For example, OpenAI's ChatGPT, which generates images using its DALL-E model, now has explicit guardrails around generating images in the style of specific artists, likely in response to the aforementioned lawsuits. Yet its model was still trained on hundreds of millions, if not billions, of copyrighted images created by humans without the permission. In addition, what about the cultural property part of the disposition? So this image shows that following its directions not to mimic the style of a specific living artist, in this case, a contemporary artist of Haida heritage, ChatGPT defaults instead generating a fake image of art in the style of artworks and cultural objects produced by people of the Haida Nation. And this doesn't particularly look like that specific artist's work at all. And while ChatGPT will refuse to create images depicting closed cultural practices, you can see like I asked it to, just to make this point. Although you could probably find a way around this, and there are lots of people online dedicated to sort of like figuring out ways to trick ChatGPT to discard its directions. It doesn't object to creating its own depictions of, for example, an indigenous culture's sacred stories or images, whether these are accurate or not. And it does not object to appropriating that imagery for explicitly inappropriate uses, like a logo for a fictional coffee shop. So as generative AI becomes more and more ubiquitous, more and more integrated into our web browsers, email platforms, productivity tools, I'm surprised Zoom isn't asking us to like, try generating something. I think the other platform that we use at my institution is already doing that. So as it becomes more and more ubiquitous, visual literacy learners will continue to need to grapple with weighing convenience and curiosity around generative AI with their ethical values for participating in visual culture. And that brings me to the final disposition that I want to highlight. Visual literacy learners identify as both consumers and creators of visuals, acknowledging how positionality, bias, experience, and expertise inform the interpretation and communication of visuals. So whether or not you think of yourself as an artist, you are not just a passive consumer of visuals, but an active participant in creating images and contributing to visual culture. If you have ever taken an image and shared it online, if you have passed along or edited a meme, and this is to quote some comics, this is a great power that comes with great responsibility. By reflecting on these roles and thinking about how we are positioned, acknowledging how those positions impact the way we interpret and communicate, just like we've been doing during this presentation, we are taking like the very first small step in working towards a more just world. So I am actually in the middle of a research project with my friend and colleague at UNC Greensboro, Assistant Professor of New Media and Design, Kelly O'Brien. Our project is called How We See AI. And so the project uses an arts-based research method called collage inquiry and asks participants to reflect on AI's growing role in society through the creation of paper collages from print ephemera, so taking it totally analog. And while our research is not about visual literacy, we designed the research, the workshops we hold to put a lot of the knowledge practices and dispositions I talked about today into practice. This project is taking us around the country, and we'll be holding a collage workshop in New York in February. So again, if you're local and you're interested in learning more, please feel free to get in touch with me or check out our project on Instagram. And you can also feel free to follow up with me if you have any questions about anything that I talked about today or want to chat about visual literacy. With that, I think I can turn this back over to Joey for some questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That was great. We did have two folks who shared in the chat who used to work with younger aged folks, elementary school all the way up to 8th grade. And they mentioned this program called Learning to Look,
Mm.
which I guess helped with slow looking and critical thinking. Folks are interested. Have you heard about this program?
So I am definitely not an expert in slow looking. That is like more of like some of my colleagues who worked on this framework with me, their area of expertise. However, like slow and reflective looking activities are like really embraced, especially at the K through 12 level, because they like contribute a lot to developing critical thinking skills. And so, whereas I'm not really familiar with that particular method or program, I do know that, for example, VTS is used a lot with children, and that there are lots of different sort of frameworks, methods, activities that fall under slow looking or close looking that are used at the K through 12 level, and I think are really beneficial.
Thanks, Maggie. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. We have two questions related to the social justice component of visual literacy. And we have a question that says, do you anticipate any problems with some participating due to the importance of social justice? I'm thinking of what is happening in many states involving what is taught in schools and what books libraries can offer.
Sure. So this framework is an official document of the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is part of the American Library Association, and is a guidance document, right? So there's no formal participation in using the framework or not, and language at the beginning of the framework makes an emphasis on it being flexible and intended to be adapted by people at the local level and in their individual context as they can. I do know that the idea of social justice or like having that be something like as an ideology, I guess, even in North Carolina, where I am located, is a contentious one. And I acknowledge that there are people in like institutional settings where they have been like sort of explicitly prohibited from engaging with content as part of professional development or in their duties sort of under that banner. But that was not our sort of purview or concern in creating this document, which was intended to be pedagogical for librarians, and therefore sort of falling under the banner for librarians specifically in higher education, who generally have academic freedom. I do understand that the terminology here probably makes it prohibitive for some people to sort of use formally, but I don't think that there's anything particularly, if you actually read it, contentious about aiming for a more socially just world by hoping to use visuals in an equitable, inclusive, and accessible way.
Thanks so much for that answer,
Of course.
Maggie. We have a question related to if you can share a little bit about if/how you use this to talk with faculty to shape the instruction / approaches you take with classes.
Sure. So because I work specifically with art students and other students in creative disciplines, I think that it helps me sort of explicitly make connections between the kinds of things that studio art students do in studio classes as being related to creating intellectual material being related to research practices, that this is not sort of just the concern of humanities or social science disciplines. But likewise, I think that the language of this document and the emphasis on visuals being an interdisciplinary concern can be used with faculty and disciplines who are like, you know, images or fine art, you know, has nothing to do with our discipline. And I'm not trying to promote the book that I edited, but most of the chapters are online under Creative Commons licenses, freely available. And there are lesson plans from librarians who work, again, across the disciplines, applying this framework and different examples of that. But typically, I try to think about how visuals function in the discipline that I am working with. Is it creative? You know, are they used for like an evidentiary purpose? You know, can it help students develop observation skills, et cetera? And then try to work backwards from there, thinking about how I can design instruction that supports the needs of the discipline around visuals, but also incorporates in some of the knowledge practices and dispositions that I think are important for students to learn in those cases.
Cool, thank you so much.
Sure.
I dropped the WorldCat link in the chat to Unframing the Visual, but like Maggie mentioned, a lot of that is also freely available online.
Yeah, you can especially find it if you search the names of the chapters. So if you're able at that link to look at the table of contents, all of the individuals who chose to publish their chapter under Creative Commons have probably posted it somewhere online, which they have the explicit permission to do so as their own work of intellectual property.
Maybe this will be our last question. And someone is asking, is there such thing as visual literacy privilege? Do some kids grow up in a social environment which helps them discern visuals better?
This is a great question and not something that I have given a lot of thought to in this like particular framing. There is definitely visual literacy privilege in that visuals are not accessible to people who have low vision or who are blind. And there has not been kind of broadly a lot of work to make visuals accessible to those people, unless there is some kind of legal construct making that compulsory, like, for example, educational institutions have to make visuals accessible, visual content accessible to students who may need those visuals, you know, having alt text or thick description, et cetera. In terms of kids growing up in a social environment, which helps them discern visuals better, almost certainly. I'm not sure if there are reliable parameters, if those, you know, if that's related to class, if that's related to geography. But I think it is relatively safe to say that there are lots of axes of privilege that will help people have more access to visual culture, to more various visual culture, and have educational and social environments that give them better opportunities to practice the kinds of critical and reflective thinking that I've talked about today. But I don't think, oh, sorry, I'm seeing Stephanie. Yes. I'll talk about all Texas poetry in a second. But yes, almost certainly. But I don't think that as a named privilege, a lot of like literature or writing exists about that. My friend in the chat just mentioned an art project called Art Text as Poetry. which is a project of two contemporary artists, Finnegan Shannon and Bohana. I can't remember Bohana's last name. But that's something that you can check out. They have a website, and the idea is creating alt text that is as evocative as images themselves. That alt text doesn't have to just be dry and sort of uh, adhering to compulsory legal requirements, but can be beautiful like art is.
I really appreciate all of your thoughtful answers today, Maggie. I'm also excited to poke around at this alt text as poetry
I know
project.
it's great.
And I just want to share you've gotten a lot of thanks in the chat. And folks are excited to see how how we see AI project progresses. So again, I just want to thank you for spending some time to talk with our community today. And I'll pass it off to you, Maggie, to say any final parting words.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Sorry for any tech issues. I also know that I say and ah and like a lot, and that's something that I should work on but haven't been. So I really appreciate I really appreciate having this platform and the invitation that Joey and the Frick Art Research Library extended to me. And I would love to chat more with anyone who's interested.
All right. Thanks so much. I hope everyone has a great day. Take care. Bye.